The chandeliers sparkled above silk-draped tables, the music soft, the laughter easy until the doors slammed open. Three men in dark coats stormed in, their movements sharp, practiced, deadly. All eyes froze on the powerful female CEO at the center table. Panic exploded. Glasses shattered, screams ricocheted off marble, chaos swallowed elegance. And in the corner, a single dad pulled his daughter close, whispering for her to stay down. No one expected what happened next, because in that instant, the past he had buried roared back to life, unleashing a hidden skill that turned a night of terror into the beginning of a story more shocking than anyone could imagine. The chandeliers of Leonard glittered above polished marble floors, bathing the restaurant in golden light. Jazz murmured from a trio near the bar, mingling with the clink of cutlery and the perfume of roasted duck, truffle, and aged wine. Sophia Grant, a 35-year-old CEO whose reputation for precision could silence a boardroom, sat at the center table with a foreign investor. Her posture was poised, her navy suit immaculate, her dark hair framing a face the world saw as unshakable. But beneath the mask of control, she carried the ache of a childhood defined by fear, a secret loneliness she hid even from herself. In a corner booth near the window, David Miller sat across from his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. He had saved for weeks to bring her here, hoping to give her one evening of wonder beyond their modest apartment. Emma's wide eyes darted between the crystal glasses and flickering candles, her small feet swinging happily. On her wrist glinted a silver bracelet, a keepsake from her late mother. David smiled at her, though shadows lived behind his eyes. For all his quiet strength, the memory of his wife's death remained a wound that time had never closed. The night fractured without warning. The heavy doors slammed open, the sound cracking across the room like a gunshot. Three men strode in with cold precision, their movements tight, deliberate, their eyes fixed on Sophia. One lifted his hand in a subtle signal. Another's jacket shifted, revealing the metallic flash of a knife. Patrons froze. A glass slipped and shattered, sharp fragments scattering across marble. The air filled with the sharp tang of spilled wine, screams rising as chairs toppled and diners fled. Emma gasped, clutching her father's arm. Her body trembled against him, and for David, the moment split open the memory of another night. The night his wife had been taken, leaving him holding a crying baby with nothing but grief. He bent low, his voice steady. "Stay down, baby. Don't move until I come back." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, pressing the silver bracelet to her chest as though it could shield her. David rose, his body settling into a posture long buried but never forgotten. The first attacker lunged toward Sophia, knife raised high. David intercepted in a blur, his hand snapping around the man's wrist, twisting sharply in a knife disarm drill he had practiced 1,000 times. Bone strained, the blade clattered to the floor. With fluid precision, he drove a strike into the attacker's solar plexus, sending him collapsing to the ground, gasping for air. The second came fast, swinging a fist meant to break bone. David pivoted on the balls of his feet, slipped inside the arc, and delivered an elbow strike to the temple. The impact was clean, controlled, dropping the man into a linen-draped table. Plates shattered, food scattering like debris from an explosion. The third rushed from behind, knife flashing. David turned sharply, sweeping the man's legs in a leg sweep that sent him sprawling. Before the attacker could recover, David pinned him with a joint lock, twisting his wrist until the knife clinked harmlessly to the floor. In seconds, 3 trained men were neutralized. Silence swallowed the restaurant. The only sound was the soft spin of a wine glass rolling across marble before settling still. David stood in the wreckage, chest rising and falling, his eyes sharp but haunted. He had not struck to kill, only to disable, but the weight of what he had unleashed pressed heavily against his ribs. Then a voice cut through the quiet. "Daddy!" Emma scrambled from beneath the table, her sobs muffled as she threw herself into his arms. He held her close, pressing his cheek against her hair, whispering, "You're safe now." The warmth of her small frame against him steadied the storm inside. Sophia braced herself against her table, her own heart racing. She had seen bodyguards fight, men trained to protect. But this was different. David moved with a terrifying precision, yet his every action was tethered to the sight of his daughter. She watched as Emma clung to him, silver bracelet glinting in the fractured light. And in his face she saw not triumph, but grief, grief wielded as resolve. Their eyes met across the chaos. In that unspoken glance, Sophia recognized something she had long buried, the raw, unyielding power of love in the face of violence. Around them, the restaurant remained frozen, chandeliers shining above shattered glass like fractured stars. And though the immediate danger had ended, something greater had begun. A story that would unravel secrets, bind their lives together, and test the limits of courage, justice, and family. The headlines wouldn't stop. Within 24 hours, shaky cell phone footage of the Leonard incident had gone viral. Clips replayed David's swift movements frame by frame, his grip snapping down on a knife wrist, his elbow striking a man into unconsciousness, the final leg sweep ending in a joint lock. Commentators debated whether he was a hero or a hidden danger. "Single dad or special ops," one segment blared, while another praised him as a miracle. None of it mattered to David. All he wanted was to walk Emma to school without flashing cameras or questions shouted across the street. But the world had tasted his secret, and it wasn't about to let go. At the police precinct, the interrogation room buzzed with suspicion. A detective leaned across the table, voice sharp. "You neutralized 3 men in under 30 seconds. That's not luck. That's training. Where did you learn it?" David sat still, his hands folded, his face expressionless. His silence wasn't ignorance. It was choice. He had sworn to bury that part of himself the day his wife died, when war followed him home in the cruelest way. Across the room, Emma slept in a chair, her bracelet glinting under harsh fluorescent light. Each breath she took was another reminder. He couldn't let his past consume her future. When Sophia arrived at the station, conversations hushed. She moved with the confidence of a woman used to commanding rooms, yet her eyes softened when they fell on Emma. "She's safe?" she asked quietly. David nodded, and for the briefest moment, the mask of CEO Steele slipped, revealing something vulnerable. Recognition of a child's fragile peace. Outside the station, the story spread like wildfire. News vans camped outside David's apartment, their lenses aimed at Emma as she clutched her father's hand on the way to school. She smiled less now, shrinking under the scrutiny. That evening, Sophia appeared at their door carrying a small bag of children's books and a box of colored pencils. Emma lit up instantly, tugging Sophia inside. Soon the living room floor was covered with crayons and sketches of flowers and suns. David stood by the doorway, watching his daughter's laughter return in bursts. A warmth spread through him, tangled with fear. He had vowed to keep their circle closed, but Sophia's presence pressed gently against that barrier, not forcing, simply existing. Later, Emma presented a drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a blazing sun. Sophia blinked, her throat tightening, while David froze, torn between longing and panic. He knew how fragile these bonds were, how easily life could steal them away. But in Emma's simple art lay a truth he couldn't ignore. His daughter already saw Sophia as part of their story. Yet shadows lengthened. The district attorney, under public pressure, considered charges of excessive force. "They'll try to make you the villain," warned Karen Delgado, a sharp-tongued lawyer with eyes that missed nothing. "If you want to keep Emma, we'll fight with everything we have. But know this, they'll drag your past out in front of everyone." David's jaw tightened. He had faced enemies with rifles and bombs, but the thought of losing his daughter to legal spin terrified him more than any battlefield. Meanwhile, Sophia worked late nights in her glass-walled office, combing through evidence. Security footage revealed tattoos on the attacker's wrists, symbols tied to a network she had long suspected belonged to Victor Kane, her ruthless corporate rival. She followed the money trail through shell companies and offshore accounts, each discovery chilling her further. Then she found it. A connection to a crime years earlier, a file David would have recognized instantly. It was the unsolved assault that had taken his wife's life. Sophia's breath caught as she leaned back in her chair. The tragedies were not separate. They were threads of the same web, woven by the same hand. She pressed her fingers against an old photograph of her mother, whispering, "I won't stay silent anymore." The next day, she asked David to meet her at a small cafe tucked away from the noise. Emma sat between them, humming softly as she sketched butterflies on a napkin. Sophia leaned forward, her voice low but steady. "David, I need you to hear this. Kane wasn't just after me. The men who killed your wife, he was behind them too." His grip tightened on his coffee cup, knuckles whitening. His eyes darkened with fury and grief, but he said nothing for a long moment. Instead, he looked at Emma, her small shoulders bent in concentration over her drawing, innocence untouched by the storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, weighted with resolve. "Then this isn't your fight or mine. It's ours." Sophia glanced at Emma, who looked up with a smile and slipped her tiny hand into Sophia's. It was a gesture of trust, pure and uncalculated. In that fragile touch, something shifted. For the first time in years, Sophia felt like more than a survivor, more than a CEO. She felt like family was possible. And for David, that possibility was both terrifying and the only thing worth fighting for. The courthouse loomed against a gray morning sky, its steps swarmed by reporters whose voices blended into a roar of questions and camera shutters. Inside, the air was tense, every seat occupied, the weight of public scrutiny pressing down like stone. David sat at the defense table, his hand clasped tightly around Emma's. She wore her silver bracelet like a shield, her wide eyes flickering nervously across the sea of strangers. Sophia sat beside them, her suit crisp, her expression calm, but her heart pounded with the knowledge that this day could either shatter or save the fragile family forming between them. The prosecution struck first. Their attorney, tall and sharp-voiced, painted David as reckless. He didn't just defend himself, he unleashed combat training in a civilian setting. Those men left that restaurant broken. Do you want to live next door to a man like that? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Emma's grip tightened on David's hand, and he bent to whisper, "It's all right, baby. I'm right here." The prosecutor's voice rose. "A man conditioned to violence doesn't stop being dangerous just because he has a child." The words cut deep, aimed like a blade. David kept his face steady, though inside, fear gnawed at him. Not for himself, but for Emma, whose future could be ripped from him by a verdict. Karen Delgado rose for the defense, her tone sharp and deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, what Mr. Miller did that night wasn't violence for violence's sake. It was precision. A knife disarmed, a strike to a pressure point, a joint locked. Each move designed to protect without killing. He didn't unleash chaos. He controlled it. He didn't endanger lives. He saved them. She gestured toward Sophia. Ask Ms. Grant, who owes her life to him. The courtroom turned as Sophia stood. Her voice trembled at first, but then steadied, resonant with years of silence breaking. Those men weren't random thugs. They were sent by Victor Kane. I know this because I've traced his money, his network. He tried to destroy my company. He tried to destroy me. And years before, his men destroyed David's family. The night his wife was killed, it wasn't random. It was Kane's world reaching into his home. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Kane, seated smugly in the back, stiffened, his mask of arrogance cracking. The judge banged the gavel for order, but the truth hung heavy, undeniable. David rose slowly. His voice was quiet, steady, carrying the raw weight of a man who had fought too many battles inside and out. I've been called a soldier, a killer, a danger. But that night, I wasn't fighting as any of those things. I fought as a father. I fought to keep my little girl alive. If that makes me dangerous, then so be it. But don't mistake love for recklessness. Everything I did because of her. His gaze shifted to Emma, who looked up with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "Daddy," before burying her face against his arm. Even hardened jurors softened at the sight. Hours dragged before the jury returned, each second stretching taut. When the foreman spoke, his voice was clear. Not guilty. Relief crashed over David like a tide. Emma burst into tears, clinging to him as he lifted her in his arms. His shoulders shook, not from fear but from release, from the unbearable relief of a man who had kept his promise to never fail again. Sophia exhaled, tears spilling down her cheeks, knowing she had risked everything, her reputation, her company, but gained something far greater. Outside the courthouse, the sun broke through clouds, painting the steps in gold. Reporters surged forward, questions flying, but David saw only Emma's radiant smile and Sophia's steady presence beside him. Emma reached out, slipping her small hand into Sophia's, binding them together with the simplicity only a child could offer. That evening, in the modest comfort of David's apartment, the storm felt distant. Pasta simmered on the stove, crayons littered the table where Emma colored happily, and Sophia's laughter mingled with David's for the first time. It wasn't chandeliers or champagne, but the quiet glow of something real, a family stitched together by survival, truth, and love. Justice had been served in the courtroom, but the truest justice lived here, in the healing of wounds, the courage to trust again, and the fragile, powerful bloom of hope rising from brokenness. In the end, this wasn't just the story of an attack or a trial. It was the story of how love, truth, and courage can rewrite even the darkest chapters of our lives. A father who fought not as a soldier but as a protector, a woman who chose honesty over fear, and a little girl whose innocence bound them together reminded us all that family can be found in the most unexpected places. It's a reminder that healing is possible, that justice can prevail, and that hope can bloom even from brokenness. If this story touched you, consider subscribing for more or sharing your own journey of resilience, because your story may be the spark that inspires someone else to keep fighting for love and light.